Okay, so I'm back from the detour and I do have some characters, but they're not good characters. They're really more cardboard stand-ins, different kinds of characters who have different kinds of roles in the story, and now I want to develop them into actual characters. So unlike plot, finding videos about creating characters is actually really easy on Authortube. I think that's like the most favorite topic to talk about. Everybody likes people. I am going with a old classic, I think. It's a 5-year-old video. It's from Donne. Alexa is also a fairly big Authortuber, and her channel started also in 2017. So like I said yesterday, right, that was kind of the kickoff year for a lot of what Authortube is now, at least the big chunk of Authortube.
There are a lot of places to start when it comes to developing characters, but I always like to think about both my main plot conceit as well as the world that I am setting the story in. Your main plot conceit and world will tell you where your character needs to end up, and thus where they need to start, or approximately where they need to start. You need a character who does X, Y, Z so that the story works and makes sense. I like to think about my character's familial lineage, which basically means I also come up with their parents and also sometimes their grandparents, regardless of whether those characters appear on the page. Think about yourself. So much of who you are comes down to who your parents were when they had you, their perspective on the world, how they raised you, the values that they instilled.
I'm kind of confused here. So is this already a tip on where to start, or is this still kind of fleshing out how to develop characters? Because I agree that it makes sense to flesh out the backstory, the family connections and so on, but it's starting to get a bit mixed up, right? Because she started basically with she touched on that idea of you build the character based on what has to happen in the plot and what the world does to them, right? So they are formed by the world, but don't you need to have the world and the plot first for that to work? So how do you do that? Feels to me like we're too far ahead in the process here already, because the way she's talking, where basically figure out the backstory of the family and how the parenting style affects our character's trauma, is very much, if you already have an existing character, if you already have a character sketch in mind, you can do that, right? So for example, I said I have the chosen one character based on the present storyline. I need that character to be a certain thing so that the present storyline and the sibling dynamic that I want to tell there makes sense. So the way I arrived at that character there was basically, I have the story that I want to tell in the present storyline is that of being the sibling of a chosen one and what that does to a family. Based on that, I knew that I had to have at least 2 siblings. One of them is chosen in some way and the other one wouldn't be. That gives me the input to know to a certain degree what this character should be so that the present storyline makes sense and that the conflict that I want to tell there can happen. Basically, now that I have like this function of the character defined, it would be much easier to now go and take her tip and say, okay, so what's the family relationship there? How was this chosen one raised, especially in comparison to his sibling? There again, I kind of can arrive at who the character should be in the future version just by using contrast. So I know that in the present storyline, this chosen one character is kind of like the ideal, the favorite character, you know, the one who gets all the attention. So based on that, it will make sense to have like contrast where in the future version, he wasn't that at all. He was a completely different person. And that's why there's so much effort put in the present storyline to raise him to be someone else than this original version that we're meeting in the future storyline, who basically couldn't live up to his potential because of who he was there, right? All of this is basically plot very much shaping the kind of character that I need, and then trying to make it more engaging by using contrast and also giving the character room to grow, right? If the character in the future storyline is already this ideal version, then obviously in the present storyline this character can't grow into someone. That would be a flat character arc, and that would be really boring to read if you have like this ideal person who was always ideal. And because I have all of that knowledge, now going in and basically again kind of like working backwards, being like, okay, so I know that this character has to be basically in the future storyline this character is fairly useless and the kind of person who has a lot of conflict with his parents or his family, so that then in the present storyline we can revert that and it plays out differently. So what was the parenting style like that arrived at this result, right? And in this way it works because I already have this character to work with, right? So I already have a lot of plot details that tell me what I need, and now I can reverse engineer basically the backstory to get the character there. What do you do in this sense when you have a character who is not defined at all by anything? So let's take the detective, right? Because the detective character is very much just someone I need in that scene, right? So the opening scene is supposed to be a missing person case, kind of mystery opening, right? So there are people who are missing, and the person who would have the best insight into what is going on or to find out what is going on would be probably the person working on those cases and getting like the official insight, right? And now here the question is, so do I start by basically defining the backstory of this character? Doesn't really make sense to find out now how he was raised or she was raised, no clue who it is. That's another thing, right? I don't even know if this person is male or female, how old, is it just one person or is there like a group of people, you know, kind of like nothing other than that I need someone who is in an official position to get insight into the missing people cases, who can connect the different cases together and realize that maybe there's a pattern so that we have a starting point to find out what is going on. That's all I know about this character. The thing that she brought up with that the backstory and the family relationship stuff, that this matters and that it forms the character into more of a person. I very much agree with that. In this video, I think it's very unstructured to bring it up right at the beginning, because it kind of implied that you have a character like this chosen one who you know what the function is of in the story. If you don't have that, then maybe don't start with the backstory, I think. Maybe don't start with the parenting until you actually know what the plot is or what the conflict should be, or know what kind of character you want to have, you know, kind of like have something to work with before you start, you know, digging into the intergenerational trauma.
Every character, like every person, has a goal, something that they want more than anything. You need to think about that goal and then all the obstacles that you're going to throw in that character's way to create conflict.
Seems like a good starting point for when you don't have a character very fleshed out yet, right? Because again, here, let's go with the detective, right? So the detective, the function of this character in the story is to open the story and present the opening mystery that should keep the reader around. And that also means that this character has to have something about them that would make the reader at least care for the character enough to stick with them throughout the opening. So a character that doesn't avert the reader away from the story just because this is kind of the first person we meet. So let's start with the goal here. So what does this character want? This character wants to find out what happened to those people and where they've gone. Why they want to do that? That could be several reasons, right? So it could be either external, it's pressure, that's their job, and there are a lot of people who are missing a loved one and who are basically, I don't know, I had like this idea of an opening scene where you have like a police station swarmed with people who are basically waiting in the waiting areas for news, who are even staying there overnight, sleeping there on the floors, you know, kind of like holding up pictures of the people who are missing. So that could be kind of like an opening scene of showing that how far this problem of people going missing has already progressed. I think I'm actually more leaning towards a society that works fairly well of people who have gone missing in a short amount of time, and of the internal motivation. And the reason for that is that I think it's the stronger opening for the entire story, because the whole thing that we had with the character arc was that basically they start out trying to help those people, and then they learn that those people are no longer people and basically run into a trap because of it, right? It's a much stronger realization in a world that functions fairly well, rather than in this other version where basically it was everyone for themselves from the beginning, right? So there's a stronger change there. That's one thing. And then there's the other thing that I like the mystery aspect of a lot of people going missing fairly quickly. So that it's from the get-go should give the reader more a sense of this isn't just kind of like a murder mystery or stuff like that. So this supernatural element that comes into play, or this sci-fi element, that should be somewhere hidden, somewhere kind of like in the opening already, right? So that you could sense that it turns out to be that kind of story. And finally, it's just probably a stronger motivator to have it be an internal conflict rather than just an external one, because the external one will happen anyway, right? The more time passes, the more people go missing. This external pressure to find out what happened will happen anyway.
Characters are all about specificity. And these things that I've mentioned so far all play into that, where they're from, how they see the world, their goals. Think about your favorite characters in fiction. What makes them specific? Why do you like them? Often it is the specific details, whether it's their sense of humor and how they use humor in the world, a tick that they have, a weird habit that they adore coffee, whatever that thing is.
I know she had to have an example, so no offense here, but somebody liking coffee is not a personality trait, and it's not a quirky thing. Like I said, the video is like 5 years old and she had to have an example, so fair enough, right? But that's what I mean. I don't really know the person themselves, right? I don't know anything. Like I said, I don't even know if it's a man or a woman, but I'm supposed to now figure out what are their special traits, what are their quirky habits and stuff. Seems to me like we're way too far down the process of developing a character. I very much agree that what she said here is important in terms of making the character interesting and stuff, but you can only do that once you actually know who the character is, right? So what I mean is, basically with The Chosen One, the first thing that I already had was I knew the function of this character in this story, right? And based on that, I could figure out some detail. And then once you have the function the character has to fill, you can go and figure out the goal the character has themselves. That's what worked with the detective here, right? And then the next step is what? So what comes between, I have a character who has this function in this particular scene and who does that because they want to achieve this and this. And how do I go from that to, okay, this person has this sense of humor because I know this person so well that I know what they sound like and what they would do, and it's very easy to figure out the backstory because I, kind of like all those things that it feels very much that those things you can do and you can flesh out when you already have a character in mind, and just to make them more specific and kind of give them more aspects, aspects to consider to flesh them out. I would actually be interested in if that's just my problem right now with obviously the story that I wrote myself into this kind of situation, because I first did the plot and all the other stuff and not really had characters. Do you have the same problem with your story, especially if you have like one protagonist that you're working on or one character? How did you arrive at the character? Did you already have the character, or are you figuring the character out based on, kind of what we're doing here? And if so, how are you doing it? So that I can do it too. That would be helpful.
Think about your character's greatest faults as well as their greatest strengths.
Let's take the character arc thing again from yesterday and try to apply it to the detective to figure out their flaw. How do I do that? Okay, what was it? So it was basically they have a goal to believe a lie and they learn the truth, right? Is it positive? Is it negative? How does the first turning point end? So they start out with having missing people cases, and it ends when they find those monsters, and they come to believe that those missing people have been killed by the creatures, and those creatures are basically responsible for those missing people. And then the truth that they learn is that those missing people are the creatures. The character's goal is very much to save those missing people and find out what happened to them. If it's a negative character arc, then that would mean that they come across those creatures, come to believe those creatures are the reason why those people are missing, and maybe kill them or try to kill them, something like that, right? Something that they then, when they learn the truth, very much regret. I think that's the stronger way to go about it than the opposite, where they find it out and prevent killing those people or those creatures. Because this way, it also creates more of kind of like this tragedy, pity aspect that I want the reader to feel for the creatures before they obviously turn. We have a good person who's very conscientious, who wants to find those people, save those people, and give the all the ones who are looking for those people answers. That's their goal, that's their motivation. They come to believe that those creatures are responsible for the missing people by having abducted them, killed them, whatever, ate them. Now I have to figure out the flaw of the character, right? So the lie that they believe is that those creatures have killed those people, which isn't really a flaw, right? Because the only thing that you could fault this character for is lack of imagination, but they never come across this kind of situation before, so that seems a bit unfair. Maybe we said this person is very conscientious, right? So maybe they get so over fixated in trying to figure out what is going on that they fail to see clues that would have told them what is going on earlier. Or maybe they get people in danger because of that. Or it could also be kind of like a fake out realization. And what I mean is that you're switching viewpoints afterwards, right? So this character only has like a small character arc. So what if this character is so focused on saving those people, finding those people, that they go after those creatures and get a lot of people with them to go there, you know, probably the other people who are looking for the missing people, so everyone who is related to them, friends, family, stuff like that, get a large group of people there, only to find out that those missing people are those creatures, and obviously they have turned in some way. And then it becomes kind of like this scenario where it seems that our detective has brought a large group of people into some sort of infectious zone where maybe now they also start turning. That could be a tragic outcome, right? That so they find out. The way that they found out that those missing people are creatures is by the ones who are going to look for them starting to turn themselves, and that's where they learn the truth. And in their effort to try to do their job and save those people, they very much caused this kind of situation. For it to really be kind of like a character moment that is tragic would be that there has to be an element that tells them not to do something, but they still do it. I have the goal, I have the flaw. I don't know who that character's parents are. I don't know who this character is yet, but at least I know much more in terms of the function. I can't really be specific whether or not they like coffee. We will get to that, but for now, let's see what else I can do with this character.
Too many words make that move. If somebody has too many copies, well, they're going to be too busy to do whatever thing you need them to do within your plot. If somebody has a ridiculous number of talents, well, then they verge on Mary Sue, Gary Stu territory. And again, they're not dynamic. Someone who is really great at a lot of things and not bad at anything is boring. And
that's also something that I would be interested in hearing some experiences. If you do create your characters upfront without the writing process, how do you do it so that you don't basically end up with a character who is too perfect or too flawed or stuff like that. Because what I found when you write a scene, because it's kind of spontaneous, the character also tends to not be a certain fixed thing. So maybe I set out to have like my character, I want this character to be like this super smart person, and then I write the scene, and because I myself don't really know much about what they're talking about, right, the character ends up appearing to think they themselves are super smart when they're not, and this sticks around because I don't really know the character very well yet, and I kind of liked how the scene turned out, and that starts to form the character. That's something that I experienced myself when very much trying to draft stories, that it's very hard to implement something that you have like on a checklist when you're actually doing it in the writing, because there's so much changes when you actually have to create the sentences. So is that something that happens for you too, or are you very much able to create a character and then put them in the story? The thing that I'm struggling most with this video is that it's all a list of aspects to consider when developing a character, but there's really no how to apply it. There's not even like a real order how to apply it. It's personally, my approach, my intuition here would be that you don't start with dislikes and quirks stuff before you figure out the character's motivation and stuff. But I also wouldn't necessarily start with the parenting and the backstory before I know the character's motivation. Kind of like, in what order is this? Is this like the set order that she would apply? Is this like the step-by-step? Or is this just a list of all aspects of things that you have to consider when developing? That's the biggest struggle that I have with this video, and especially on how to apply it, right? Because there isn't really a technique here given on how to apply it. It's really just consider that it's important that your character is specific, and those aspects, as in terms of they should have likes and dislikes and quirks and stuff, that makes them specific, stuff like that, right? That's kind of like a checklist to look at after you develop the character, to remember, maybe make them more memorable if that's something that your character is missing, but seems very hard to do when you don't have the character yet. So feels more like an editing checklist actually than an actual developing the character from scratch process. I think what's going to work for me, because I don't know the characters, is that first I have to figure out what function does each of the characters have to serve in that part of the story. Based on that, what is their goal, so that I arrive at the next plot point, and from there figure out what is their flaw, and then start to reverse engineer the character who basically makes this plot point happen. And after that, once I've figured all of that out, then basically I have the basic structure for characters there, right? I have the functionality figured out, I have the character arc figured out based on the plot, and from there I would probably just choose what kind of character I want it to be. So starting to give them the whole demographic criteria stuff, like, okay, this character is a woman, this character is a man, this character is this age, kind of like figuring that stuff out based on my own preference, I would assume. And then I can start to apply these whole making it specific, what is their backstory, what is the tie-in into their community, what are their quirks, how to make them more memorable. All of that stuff I think I'm going to do in the scenes and in the writing itself. So what I'm going to do is to figure out function of the character in the story, goal and flaw, have the character arc for all the characters in the story, so that my blueprint, my outline is finalized. And then when I actually write the story, then I'm going to figure out the details of the character and maybe come back to it and use this approach as an editing approach. I think I'm going to do that.